Hello, everyone. This is your first mini lecture for BBMM605 Entrepreneurship. So basically, this is session 1.1, and we're starting with most of chapter 2 and elements of chapter 1. All right, I just wanted to remind you that this is a mini lecture, which means it's not meant to cover all the topics for the unit or all the topics of the chapter. What it's meant to is to give you an idea on what to expect for this chapter. But also, I want you to go back to the lecture slides, which are on Moodle, to read all the lecture slides that are placed there so that you can have a proper review after watching this video. So just to give you an example, just wanted to show you what that looks like. So this is Moodle, and I've just opened up the session 1.1 folder, and you'll see the lecture 1.1 slides there, which you're supposed to click on and basically read in its entirety. I also wanted to remind you that probably the best way to study this course is actually to read the book. So this book is available in the library. So please, if you have the time, go and visit the library and get a copy of this book. So let's go on with our mini lecture today. So what is entrepreneurship anyway? So many people think that entrepreneurship means creating a small business. But actually, entrepreneurship is more than that. So what it is, it's a process of innovation and new venture creation. So in other words, if you're creating a brand new business, or it could be a small business, but it could be also be a big business. You could be part of a large corporation and you're starting a new revenue stream for that organization. You would be technically doing entrepreneurship. And if you're innovating something within that organization and you're using the concepts of entrepreneurship, then you are, in other words, an entrepreneur in that sense. So what is an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur drives economic change through purposeful searching, careful planning, and sound judgment when carrying out this entrepreneurial process that we just described. So by the way, there are 4 dimensions to being an entrepreneur. One is the individual dimension, which means being an entrepreneur for yourself. You might be creating a new business. Or you could be, as I said a while ago, part of a larger organization, and you're doing a new revenue stream for that organization, and in which case you would be somewhat an organizational entrepreneur. But you could also be doing this for the environment. For example, there are many entrepreneurs that work with not-for-profit organizations that try to save the environment, save wildlife, for example. And you're doing it through various new ventures to try to save the environment. So that could be part of being an entrepreneur as well. Okay, so entrepreneurial discipline means having that concept of doing several things at one point, looking at the organization, looking at the different aspects of an organization to do your business. So this applies to businesses, but it also applies for not-for-profit organizations or service organizations. You could be in government or non-government institutions as well. Entrepreneurial leadership means it combines 2 capacities in the pursuit of innovation. So in other words, entrepreneurs basically have strong leadership qualities, the capacity to lead not just other people, but to lead themselves as well, to motivate themselves. And entrepreneurs also have a capacity to take risks. And this is a really important part of being an entrepreneur. And really, entrepreneurial leadership is something that's like a buzzword in the 21st century. A lot of businesses use this, a lot of business environments are going into what we call entrepreneurial leadership. So a little bit of a note between the difference between a small business owner and an entrepreneur. Now, small business owners are not always entrepreneurial. Many of them are, but many small business owners are really just satisfied with existing sales or revenue. They don't really expect to grow. A lot of them are just happy with just doing just enough profit to survive, and they're not really after growth. In which case, you are a small business owner, but not really driven by that entrepreneurial spirit. On the other hand, entrepreneurs focus a lot of effort on innovation. They focus a lot of effort on creating growth in their profit and making sure that that growth is actually sustainable, something that can be continued as time goes by. So small business owners can be an entrepreneur. Right? I mean, if you're starting a new business and you're thinking of something very innovative, then you are an entrepreneur. However, if you're starting a business and all you're doing is copying somebody else's business, then technically you're not really hewing to the entrepreneurial spirit. So as I said here, SBOs or small business owners may be entrepreneurs, but not all entrepreneurs are small business owners. All right, now this chapter is all about a mindset. In other words, and that's really the essence of being an entrepreneur, is having that right mindset. In fact, later on, I'm going to ask you to watch several videos within Moodle, which really emphasize what kind of a mindset an entrepreneur has. So a mindset is the common characteristics associated with successful entrepreneurs. And that's why we study successful entrepreneurs, to get an idea on how they drive their businesses and basically how they're utilizing this spirit or this mindset to create success for themselves. So who are these entrepreneurs? These are independent individuals. They're very committed to what they're doing. They're determined to persevere. In other words, they don't quit when times get hard. And of course, they work very hard. So they're very confident and they're optimists. So in other words, they believe, they have a lot of hope. They have a lot of hope for success, hope for the world, and hope for successful businesses. They are very competitive. They have a very competitive desire, and they use failure as a learning tool. So they don't quit when they fail. Instead, they use this failure to sort of teach themselves, okay, what went wrong and what can we do to sort of improve in the future. All right. There are a lot of characteristics of entrepreneurs, but I just wanted to highlight, and I put it in bold here. These are really what I think are really the more important characteristics of entrepreneurs, or that mindset that we were talking about. So the first is determination and perseverance. Never say die attitude. You're always, even if you're faced with failure, you're always getting back up and trying again. And you have this orientation for opportunity. In other words, you're looking at different ways you could improve your business, and looking at, oh, what if I do this? There are no rules that keep you in a box when you're an entrepreneur. You always take responsibility and initiative. So when volunteers are called for, you raise your hand because you feel you want to take that responsibility and you want to learn from that responsibility. Entrepreneurs have an internal locus of control, and what that really means is that you believe that you can change the world. You feel that you're not dependent on whatever's happening in the outside world, and you're not dependent on, oh, I didn't do well because my teacher wasn't that good. So you take control of your own life, and that's what this means, an internal locus of control. You have a tolerance for ambiguity. Entrepreneurs have a tolerance for ambiguity. What that means is you don't mind if things are unclear. There are no step-by-step rules. And if I give you instructions to do something, and even if it's unclear, it's okay. You're willing to work with that vague situation. Again, most entrepreneurs are risk takers, and that means that they're bold, they take chances. However, calculated risk taking means that you don't make stupid risks. It's almost like saying, I don't jump off a cliff just because the cliff is there. I know I can die if I jump off a cliff. Now, I am willing to jump off a cliff if I've got a parachute on. So, and I'm assuming the cliff is high enough. And most entrepreneurs have a strong sense of creativity and innovativeness. What that means is they're willing to look at the bright side. They're looking to see what unique contribution they can make in any business. So let me just pause there for a moment. All right, apologize for that. I didn't realize my laptop was not plugged in, so it's running low on batteries. So we were just talking about this slide here about the characteristics of entrepreneurs or the entrepreneurial mindset. And we just talked about entrepreneurs being creative and innovative. So let's go on. All right, so this is a good summary slide, which just tells us when you're an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial organization, you have these very basic and very broad characteristics. Number one, you're very flexible. So you're not driven by rules. In fact, you have the tendency to break rules and look at the what can be done, and you're not restrained by these rules. Of course, I'm not saying that you should be doing, if you're an entrepreneur, you should be doing illegal things. So what I'm sort of saying is that you're willing to break the usual standards. If an idea is, for example, most cars are driven by petrol or fuel, then can you come up with a car that's not driven by petrol, but is driven by something else, like, for example, the sun or by electricity? So that's what we mean by being flexible, thinking out of the box. So entrepreneurial organizations have a lot of imagination. So again, an example would be the Apple company. And they're not just driven by the usual rules of doing business. Again, as I was saying, that flexibility. They've got this creativity to think of new ideas. And entrepreneurial organizations have that strong willingness to accept risks. So in other words, they're not stopped by risk. If we know that there's a possibility of failure, that does not stop entrepreneurial organizations. They think of ways to mitigate those risks, or in other words, reduce those risks, and then continue on with business. Okay, entrepreneurship has a dark side. In other words, it's not always positive when you're an entrepreneur or when you are dealing with entrepreneurship. First of all, because we are risk takers, entrepreneurs are risk takers, we always have this balancing act between the financial risk versus the profit motive. Yes, we want to make a profit if we're if we're for a profit business. However, we know that if we invest something, we have to spend money to invest on something. We know that there's a possibility of losing that money that you've invested in case things don't turn out like we planned. There's also this career risk, and this is what we mean if you're an individual entrepreneur and you decide to do a business on your own. Now you could lose that employment security. So unlike if you are an employee and you're hired by a company, most of that risk is done by the company itself, and most of the time your job will continue. But if you're an entrepreneur, you could lose your own money, and in fact your business could fold up, and therefore your employment could be lost. There's a family and social risk, which means there's commitments to work, and you also have a commitment to your family. And oftentimes that is a very strong two forces that don't necessarily go together. Um, if work has a lot of commitment required, then it may take away time from your family. There's also a psychic risk. The impact of failure can actually affect the mental health of entrepreneurs. And I put this in myself, and usually I've seen this a lot with many entrepreneurs who do business on their own. There's a lot of temptation to do unethical behavior. So in other words, because we're driven by that force to succeed, and there is some temptation to cut corners, and we'll talk about that a little later. All right, so one thing with entrepreneurs also is that they have a strong need for control. So in other words, they're a bit of a control freak. They always want to make sure that the things are according to what they plan. So this is chronic and severe sense of urgency. Everything is, you're always in a hurry. You want things right away, because that's basically the essence of being an entrepreneur. There's constant involvement in multiple projects subject to deadlines. So in other words, you are a multitasker. You could have one or two projects going on at the same time, and you want things done in a certain way for each of these projects. So you can imagine the pressure of being an entrepreneur. The tendency for an entrepreneur is to neglect all aspects of life except work. So, you're driven by that work. As I was saying earlier, your tendency is to work and work and work, and you ignore the other aspects of your life, such as your family. And because entrepreneurs have this tendency not to trust other people, there's this tendency that they want to do things on their own. They often take excessive responsibility for things. So there is a bit of a problem on delegation. So entrepreneurs often tend not to delegate because, again, of that lack of trust. Again, we are describing some of the more common negative aspects of being an entrepreneur. Okay, we'll talk about ethics now, entrepreneurial ethics. And again, it's just like in ethics in normal business, and I'm sure many of you have taken a business society and ethics course within the college or somewhere else. Ethics are really the basic rules or parameters for conducting any activity in a socially acceptable manner. So in other words, what society believes is an acceptable practice, usually that guides ethics in business as well. And ethics is a set of principles prescribing a behavioral code of what is good and right or bad and wrong. So in other words, ethics guides us. It tells us whether what we're doing is the right thing or if it's the wrong thing. And oftentimes we know when what we're doing is not quite ethical or not. And ethics defines the situational moral duty and obligation. So if you are set with you're facing what we call an ethical dilemma, then that situation ethics might guide you in that particular situation. What is an ethical dilemma anyway? So what an ethical dilemma is when you are forced to make a choice between two negatives. And oftentimes one negative is an unethical choice, and the other choice is perhaps simply a bad thing for yourself. So a great example might be you're a businessman, and you need to pay taxes because your company is operating in a legal environment. But then you know that you're not making that much money, and you feel like you've got to make enough money to make an investment. But so you start thinking, oh, maybe I can just not pay that much tax, and I can reduce my tax. I can cheat on my accounting books, because again, I'm going to use that money to invest in something within my business. So obviously we're thinking of doing something unethical and illegal, because we're thinking about our own interests, okay, our own personal interests. I think the more difficult ethical dilemmas are when we are being made to choose between two unethical things. You might be forced to have to fire an employee, which could be somewhat unethical in many cases. But then, the other unethical side of it is perhaps, um, that you need to you need money to continue your business, to sustain your business. So you're ending up you're choosing between firing an employee without any basis, or having to cheat on your taxes. So that's an example of two unethical situations that you have to choose from. So ethical dilemmas basically stems from pressure from the inside and outside. So in other words, this is from your own interests and also the interests of other people. So for example, the interests of government. Interest of government is to collect taxes from companies, but then your own inside interest is to make money. So that's an example of two interests from the inside and the outside clashing. Okay, so another source of ethical dilemmas are changes in societal values and norms. Now, giving a good example of this is fairly recently, the Victorian Parliament has agreed, or basically has created a law that makes euthanasia, or a form of euthanasia, to be legal. So euthanasia means assisted suicide. So what we're saying is that an Australian in Victoria can actually get help if they have a terminal illness and they're going to die, that they can actually commit suicide and kill themselves, and that would be legal. Of course, there are certain parameters to that. You need to prove that you are in fact dying of an illness. Now, many of you may not agree with that. Okay, but that's an example of an ethical dilemma. Are you going to agree to, if you're a doctor, for example, you might be faced with that. As a doctor, your ethics might tell you, I'm here to save lives, but yet by law, you may need to assist someone, not necessarily may need, but if somebody wants to, an ill person who is going to die might say, I want to commit suicide, then would you help that patient to commit suicide? So that's a great example of a dilemma that you might be faced if you were a doctor. I'm not trying to tell you, one is better than the other, one option is better than the other. I'm just sort of exposing and explaining to you that these are some of the dilemmas that might be faced by a person or an entrepreneur. Okay, so if we want to avoid unethical behavior, we have to learn what are the common sources of why these unethical behaviors occur. So the first on the screen is greed. So in other words, this is probably the worst reason for us to commit unethical behavior. If you're an entrepreneur, you're making some money, and you're thinking, I think I'll do something unethical because I want to make more money. The opposite of this might be survival, where you know that your business is not doing well and you're in trouble of folding up. Your business might end, and you're thinking, well, I might commit something unethical in order for my business to go on. You're thinking about your employees. You're thinking about, how am I going to continue helping my employees, helping them earn a salary if my business discontinues? And therefore, that's survival as opposed to greed, which is, you're making a lot of money, but you want to make more money. A great example of this actually is Volkswagen, and as a corporation, they were guilty. The government found out that they were cheating on their emissions testing. So in other words, emissions are the pollutants that come out of your cars. And what Volkswagen was doing was giving a figure that was actually not correct. And they were fooling the customers and fooling the government and saying that our cars don't really emit that much pollution, when in actuality they were emitting more pollution than they were saying. So that is an example of greed, because Volkswagen is of course a very profitable company, and yet they were doing these unethical things. Okay, another reason for unethical behavior is the fact that some entrepreneurs differentiate between the activities at work and their activities at home. So, many entrepreneurs have families, and they might say, well, to be a good example for my kids, I want to do the right thing and be ethical, because I want to raise my kids to be good citizens and ethical citizens. But then when they're at work, they do something different and they cheat on their taxes. Because they're saying, well, that's different. Work is different from home. At home, I can be ethical, but at work, I want to. I should be able to do unethical things for the survival of my business. Obviously, this is wrong. But again, this is a thinking that many entrepreneurs have. Many entrepreneurs might do the wrong thing because they have a lack of foundation in ethics. Maybe they were brought up to believe that it's okay to bribe government officials, because that's basically everybody does it. That kind of a viewpoint. We talked about survival a while ago. The other reason might be a reliance on other social institutions to convey and reinforce ethics. So we're saying, I'm a small businessman. I don't need to set an example for others. Let the government do that. Let big corporations do ethical things. But for me, I'm just a small company. I can do whatever I want. So that kind of thinking could be a source of why people will do something unethical. All right. So lots of experts will tell you that if you're a good businessman, doing the right things, being ethical is actually doing good business. So in other words, at the end of the day, if you are ethical, that will be good for your business. You will eventually reap more rewards for being ethical. And you might argue, well, how can that happen? Well, it is good for business because unethical practices can eventually destroy the firm itself, as well as free markets and free trade. What that means is, if you as a business owner are doing unethical things, then you are actually setting a bad example for your employees. And if your employees see you as a business owner cheating the government, for example, or cheating your customers by coming out with poor quality products, then your employees are learning behavior that it's okay to do unethical things. And what happens if they start cheating? If my business owner cheats the government, then me as an employee, maybe I can cheat the business owner. I can steal from my company. So we are setting a wrong example for our employees. So I think that's the main point of this. The other thing is, if our company cheats and for example, bribes government officials in order to gain contracts, then we're setting a bad example for other companies as well. And if all companies start to bribe government officials, then that will be very negative for the citizens. And I can see this in many countries where companies are bribing government officials to get contracts, and therefore, the prices are going up. Their contracts are much higher than it's supposed to be, and the taxpayer ends up paying more, and they're not getting as much services because of that corruption that's happening. And that's it. That's how it basically affects free markets and free trade. Now, doing ethical things, if our company does ethical things, basically we are improving the reputation of our company. And hopefully, if we do the right thing, this wins back the public's confidence in the firm. In other words, our reputation improves. Now, Sir Adrian Cadbury, and I quote him, "A merchant does better to take a loss than to make a dishonest profit. A loss is painful for a while, but dishonesty hurts forever." I guess what this means is if you had to make a choice as an entrepreneur, whether to lose a little bit of money or to do something unethical, it's probably better to lose a little bit of money because that's a temporary situation. Eventually, you'll make money to cover your losses. But if you do something dishonest, like not pay your taxes or cheat your customers or cheat your employees, then that is something that will damage your consciousness or your conscience. Your conscience will bug you for the rest of your life. All right. Now, as entrepreneurs and as leaders of our organization, we need to create that ethical culture within our organization. How do we do that? For entrepreneurs especially, it stems from themselves. It stems from being a business owner. Because as a business owner, you are the leader of your organization, and your employees will see you and basically look at you as an example. So you need to have the right values, the right ethical values, especially. And another thing that's really good to have is a code of ethics. And what a code of ethics is a set of rules it's a statement, basically, a written statement which you can share with your employees. And this statement basically outlines how we will do business in the right way. You can have very specific statements like, we will pay the proper taxes, we will not cheat on our taxes, we will pay our employees the right wages according to society's norms, or we'll treat our employees in as fair manner as possible. If you make that declaration, it sort of tells your employees that you, as a business owner, are aiming to do the right thing and to be ethical. And it tells them that they themselves, as employees, need to follow their employer's example. So Code of Ethics provides a clear understanding of the need for ethical administrative decision making. So your managers in your company will make decisions based on that ethical code of conduct as well, and it gives them a guide of whenever they are faced with an ethical dilemma. It also guides the behavior of employees, as we said so earlier, and we can be explicit. In other words, we can actually outline what kind of rewards and punishments we would have based on ethical or unethical behavior of our employees based on that code of conduct. All right, so that's it for today. That's it for our mini lecture. Just wanted to remind everyone to please go back to your lecture slides to view the complete lecture. And go back, if you're listening to this from a live lecture, if you were earlier in the live Q&A session with your lecturer, which would be me, please go back into that meeting right after viewing this video. Thank you.